My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 36, I live in Oregon, and until last year I thought I had finally built a life that was mine. Safe, quiet, free of ghosts. But ghosts don't knock anymore. They come in the form of cardboard boxes and pink thread. It started on a rainy Saturday morning. Maya, my daughter, had just turned 8. She was sitting cross-legged in her pajamas, cereal half spilled in her lap, and that usual sparkle in her eyes that could light up a whole room. The mail arrived late that day, and with it came a medium-sized package, unassuming and taped neatly my mother's signature touch. I recognized the handwriting immediately, slanted, delicate. Almost too careful, like she was stitching each letter with intention. "Look, Mom, it has my name." Maya giggled, hugging the box like it held a treasure map. I smiled. Maybe it was just a belated birthday gift. Maybe this was one of those rare moments where my parents tried to reach across the cold, awkward space that had stretched between us for years. "Go ahead," I said, motioning to open it. Inside was tissue paper white, crisply folded. Maya peeled it back and gasped. "It's a dress," she said, holding it up to the light. It was soft pink, delicate, embroidered with tiny stars near the hem. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. Maya twirled, laughing, before holding the dress up to her chest. And then she stopped. I mean, stopped. Not like when a kid hesitates or fumbles or zones out. No. She froze mid-motion, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see yet. "Mommy!" Her voice shrank. "What's this?" I got up, crossed the room. She turned the dress toward me, and there it was, embroidered in cursive, tiny white thread that screamed louder than any scream I'd ever heard little Emily. My knees buckled just slightly. My hands started to shake. It wasn't the name that made me flinch first. It was the way my body reacted before my mind had caught up like trauma, trapped in the muscle memory of my fingers. "Who's Emily?" Maya asked innocently. But I didn't answer. I couldn't. My husband looked up from his coffee, eyebrows raised. "Weird," he mumbled. "Maybe they stitched the wrong name by mistake." No mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was a message, a symbol, a memory repackaged. I took the dress from Maya's small hands, careful not to alarm her. "You're not wearing it," I said calmly but firmly. "But it's still pretty," she said, trying to smile. My heart ached, even if it's not my name. "You're not putting it on," I repeated, and that was that. I left the room. I didn't slam the door, didn't yell. Just walked into my bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the dress. It was pink. It was soft. It had stars near the hem, and it had her name, Emily. My sister, dead to the family, but somehow always more alive in my parents' hearts than I ever was. As I sat there holding that fabric, my breath went shallow. My lungs couldn't keep up. That name, it wasn't just a name. It was a weight. It was a wound. And I realized this dress wasn't for Maya. It was for them. If you've ever had to hold something that looks harmless to everyone else but feels like a bomb only you can hear ticking. If you've ever frozen in the middle of a quiet room because a ghost spoke without saying a word, then you know what I felt in that moment. And if you've ever been in a moment like that, please tap like and stay with me. This isn't just a story about a dress. This is a story about identity, memory, and the moment I stopped being the daughter who stayed. I sat there longer than I meant to still quiet the dress, a soft weight in my lap. It wasn't the exact same dress from back then. I knew that. But it might as well have been. Same color, same rounded collar, same scattered star embroidery near the hem. The only thing louder than the silence in the room was the sound of my body remembering before my brain did. This wasn't nostalgia. This wasn't some sweet attempt to bridge the past. This was deliberate. My parents hadn't just stumbled across a pink dress and thought, "Oh, Maya will love this." No. They had one made. Custom. With the name stitched in the same place as the original. It wasn't meant for Maya. It was a resurrection. And I knew exactly where it came from. It was my 6th birthday. I remember because I'd worn a paper crown that kept slipping down my forehead. We had neighbors over, aunts, cousins. My mom had invited everyone with that mix of guilt and obligation she specialized in, just enough to make people say yes, not enough to make it feel personal. But no one said happy birthday to me that day. Not one person. Because Emily had just gotten into a youth dance group. Sparkle Academy or Star Step, some name that sounded like glitter. She twirled into the room in her pink dress, the original one. She looked like she'd walked out of a storybook and landed right in the center of our living room. Everyone clapped, cameras flashed. My mom lit up like she'd just won something. And me, I stood by the couch holding a juice box I didn't even want. At one point, I tugged on Mom's sleeve and whispered, "It's my birthday." She didn't look at me when she responded, "Don't make this about you." That was the first time I understood the difference. Not just between being seen and being ignored, but between existing and belonging. I realized something: Emily wasn't just older. She wasn't just prettier or more talented. Emily was the daughter they wanted to remember, and I was the one they tolerated. That pink dress, it had become something sacred, a symbol, a torch passed only to the one who deserved applause. I was never given that dress. I was never given that chance. And now, decades later, they were trying again, but with Maya. Maya, my sweet, intuitive daughter, who still slept with one arm hanging off the bed and believed the moon followed her around on purpose. Maya, who didn't yet know that love can be conditional, that family can have favorites. That memory flooded me like cold water. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I might break down. But instead, I felt something else rise older, stronger. Anger? No, not quite. It was clarity. They weren't reaching out. They weren't trying to connect. They were reenacting. And they were doing it through my child. They missed Emily. They missed who she had been before she vanished, before the money disappeared, before the fraud, the silence, the endless damage. And they thought they could rebuild her in Maya. This wasn't a gift, it was a blueprint. And the worst part, Maya was too kind to see it. She just saw a beautiful dress. She thought it was pretty, even though the name wasn't hers. She would have worn it just to please them. That was the moment something shifted in me. The moment I realized I was the last line of defense between my daughter and the cycle I had barely escaped. They weren't going to rewrite history through her. They weren't going to pass down a wound wrapped in tissue paper. They had lost Emily, but they were about to lose something else too. They were about to lose me. Because sometimes silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's complicity. And I had been silent for far too long. They thought I'd just keep accepting the roles they assigned. But I'd outgrown that script, and I was done watching history try to repeat itself this time on my child. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew it started with that dress. And the first thing I would take back was my voice. I didn't sleep that night. The house was still. Maya curled up like a comma under her comforter, her soft breathing steady in the room next to mine. My husband had fallen asleep with the TV humming low. But me, I sat at the kitchen table, that dress still folded neatly in front of me like a letter I hadn't opened yet. Only now I knew what it said. I knew every syllable. The name Little Emily was stitched just above the chest, simple cursive, white thread, and yet it screamed like a siren. That night I remembered everything I had tried not to. How Emily always floated into rooms with ease. How she could recite a poem or hum a song and everyone would pause like she'd cast a spell. Even teachers gave her leeway. They said she had spark, and she did. She had a light that pulled people in. But when you live with someone who shines like that, you learn early on how to live in the shadows. No one meant to ignore me. That's what they always said. We didn't realize. We didn't mean it like that. But intentions don't soften the sting. Every photo album from our childhood told the same story. Emily beaming in the center, me somewhere on the edge, often cropped out. And yet I loved her. That was the cruelest part. I adored her. I studied her handwriting. I tried to laugh like she did. I remember thinking maybe if I just did everything right, Mom would look at me the way she looked at Emily after her first dance recital, hands clasped, eyes glassy proud. But that look never came. Emily could do anything. Fail a test. She was just too creative for rote learning. Come home past curfew, she's discovering herself. Meanwhile, if I got a B+, I was told not to get complacent. At some point, I gave up trying to compete. Not out of bitterness, out of survival. I focused on being steady, responsible, predictable. I stopped looking for approval and just did what needed to be done. And when Emily started drifting in adulthood, job to job, city to city, I stayed. When she pitched her big fashion idea, a sustainable clothing line for kids, she sold it like a dream. She had logos, websites, a mock-up of a storefront. I wanted to believe her. We all did. Maybe this was finally her chance to root herself. Be something real. She asked for investments, not help. I gave more than I should have. My parents gave what little they had. Emily promised updates, returns, results. Instead, she disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation, just a flat message. Months later, she had moved abroad, needed space, no apology, no details. then the debt began to surface. At first it was small, a missed credit card payment in my name. I thought it was fraud, someone random. But then another, then a loan, then a call from a collections agency asking about a car I'd never bought. I pieced it together slowly. She hadn't just lied. She'd taken everything, used my social security number, forged my signature. And because we were sisters, because I loved her, I hadn't protected myself. My parents called it a misunderstanding. I called it theft. But even then, even as I worked 2 jobs to dig myself out, I never stopped helping them. I paid their water bill, sent money for prescriptions, filled their fridge when they said they were short. I told myself we were in this together. I never imagined they were still talking to Emily, that they knew where she was, that they'd been using my support to help her survive. But that realization didn't come until later. That truth unraveled slowly. For now I stared at the dress in front of me and felt the heat of betrayal rising again. Because here was the thing. They hadn't just sent a dress. They had sent a signal. And what terrified me most was how easily Maya might have slipped into the same pattern I did, trying to earn love that should have been given freely. No, this stopped with me. This dress would not pass into another generation, and neither would the silence. The next morning, the dress was still on the table. Sunlight crept through the blinds, washing the room in a soft gold that almost made everything look innocent again. But innocence had left this house the moment I saw that name. I was buttering toast when Maya walked in, her hair a tangled mess, her oversized pajama shirt hanging off one shoulder. "Morning, Mommy," she said, rubbing her eyes. Her gaze landed on the dress. "Are you still mad about the name?" I crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I'm not mad, sweetie. I just think that dress isn't really for you." She tilted her head. "Because of the name?" I nodded. "Because of everything." She sat down slowly, her tiny feet swinging just above the kitchen floor. "Who's Emily?" she asked again. The innocence in her voice, it chipped away at something in me. She didn't deserve to carry this history. But if I stayed silent, she'd inherit more than just a name on a dress. "Emily was my sister." She blinked. "So she's my aunt?" "Yes," I said. "She was. We don't talk about her much, but not because she's bad. Just because sometimes people hurt others, and when they do, it's okay to protect yourself." "Did she hurt you?" she asked, looking directly at me. The honesty in her question pierced deeper than I expected. I swallowed. Yes. And not just me. But the hurt wasn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It looks like promises and pretty things. But it still leaves scars. Maya looked at the dress again, then back at me. "I don't want to wear it." I felt something inside me loosen. That small, declarative sentence, it was more powerful than any confrontation I'd had with my family. Maya had drawn a line, and she didn't even need to know the full story to feel it was wrong. Children somehow always know. I folded the dress neatly and set it aside. Then I poured her cereal, kissed her head, and pretended, just for a moment, that things were normal. But the truth was already unraveling. A part of me knew this wasn't just about a dress. This was a signal, a warning, and I needed to understand what it really meant. Because for years I had believed I was the only one left behind, that I was the only one still picking up the pieces Emily scattered. But now it seemed the past wasn't just returning, it was being repurposed. Later that day, after I dropped Maya off at school, I pulled into a quiet corner of the park, turned off the engine, and stared out the windshield. I started scrolling through old photos on my phone, ones I hadn't looked at in years. A few of Maya as a baby. A few of my parents holding her back when we were still trying to mend things. And then one buried deep, a photo of Emily and me. I was maybe 7, she was 9. She was smiling like she always did, and I was in the corner of the frame, half cropped out, half invisible. It hit me then I'd spent most of my life trying to earn space in a picture someone else already owned. I wasn't doing that anymore. Not for me, not for Maya, and not for a family who had made it clear who they saw when they looked at my daughter. That evening, as I prepared dinner, I caught Maya humming to herself, twirling in the living room, wearing one of her favorite old sundresses, the yellow one with strawberries. She was radiant in her own way, carefree, unburdened. That's what I was fighting for, that freedom. I'd kept my mouth shut for years. I'd let the past dictate the rules of my present. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't standing by with a juice box watching someone else spin in the middle of the room. Not this time. Not again. The dress was folded and ready, but it wouldn't stay in my house. It was time to send it back where it came from, and this time it would carry my message. I didn't sleep much that night either, but unlike the night before, I wasn't stuck. I was planning. By 6 a.m., I was already out of bed. The sky outside was still a pale gray, the kind that makes you feel like the whole world is holding its breath. My husband Mark was downstairs in the kitchen, already dressed for work, sipping his first coffee. I walked in, holding the dress now folded neatly inside a plain brown paper bag. He looked up. His eyes scanned my face, then dropped to the bag. He didn't ask questions. He never had to. "You sure?" he asked softly. I nodded. "I won't be long." "Can you get Maya ready for school?" Of course, he said, no hesitation. That's the thing about Mark, he doesn't push, doesn't pry. But he stands quietly behind me like a wall I didn't know I needed until I had one. I grabbed my keys, slipped on my sneakers, and walked out the door. The drive wasn't long, but it felt eternal. I don't know what I expected to feel: nervousness, maybe, a flicker of guilt. But instead there was this eerie calm, like the decision had already been made in my bones long before I acted on it. As I pulled into the neighborhood, memories flickered past the windshield. The dogwood tree I used to climb, the neighbor with the plastic flamingos, the rust-colored mailbox that leaned slightly to the left. All of it was exactly the same, and yet I didn't belong there anymore. The house itself looked frozen in time. Same chipped flower pots, same cracked walkway, same dent in the garage door from when Dad backed into it one New Year's Eve and never got it fixed. It should have felt like home, but it didn't. I walked up to the porch. The wood creaked under my feet like it remembered me. I didn't ring the doorbell. I didn't knock. I just placed the bag carefully at the door, my last offering, my final word, and turned around. Inside that brown bag was the pink dress, and a note. 3 sentences, each one carefully chosen, each one a quiet scream. "You lost one daughter. I'm the one who stayed. You just never noticed." And that was it. I got back in the car and drove away. At 9:02 a.m., the first call came, then another. By 10:15, I had 6 missed calls and 2 voicemails. By 11, I stopped checking. But I listened to one voicemail just to taste it. My mother's voice was sharp, full of disbelief. "What is this? You're returning a birthday gift. What kind of message is that?" In the background, my father grumbled, "And what does she mean she's not paying anymore? What the hell is she talking about?" And just like that, the truth landed. They weren't confused. They were angry. Not because I hurt them, but because I stopped helping them. Because for the first time, I did something that wasn't quiet. That wasn't polite. That wasn't bending myself into silence. I blocked the number. Then I opened my banking app and started canceling things. The monthly grocery reloads, the automatic bill payments, the half payments I'd been making toward their mortgage. Gone, gone, gone. It was mechanical, like unhooking wires from a machine that had been draining me for years. I didn't cry. I didn't second guess it. I just stopped. And that right there was the most revolutionary act of all. If you've ever had to stop being the helper, the fixer, the one who keeps it all afloat while drowning, silently share your story in the comments. You're not alone, and you deserve to choose peace over duty. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to forgive or explain. Sometimes it's to walk away and not look back. It had been 3 days since I left the dress on their porch. 3 days of blocked numbers, unanswered messages, and silence so thick it almost felt like peace. Until the doorbell rang. It was just after breakfast. Mark was rinsing dishes. Maya was upstairs brushing her teeth, singing some silly made-up song about jelly beans and outer space. I wasn't expecting anyone. And yet the moment the bell echoed through the hallway, I knew. I moved slowly toward the door, heart steady, feet heavier than they should have been. But before I could reach for the handle, Mark had already opened it. And there they were, my parents. My mother was holding a cake box. My father stood slightly behind her, stiff, like someone had forced him into this role. The sight of them, uninvited, unannounced, and entirely unchanged, tied a knot in my stomach. "We just want to talk," my mother said. Her voice was soft, practiced. "We're not here to argue." I didn't invite them in. I didn't move. I stayed exactly where I was, arms crossed, shoulder against the kitchen wall, the smell of coffee still lingering in the air. "You've been talking to Emily," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. They didn't deny it. "We have," my mom replied. "For some time now." I nodded once, slowly. The ache behind my ribs returned like a slow wave. "How long?" I asked. My father cleared his throat. "Since the first year she left." That was nearly 5 years ago. 5 years of lies by omission. 5 years of acting like Emily had vanished without a trace. 5 years of watching me work extra shifts, send money, cover their bills, while they funneled those same resources to her in secret. They watched me drown so she could stay afloat. So I said carefully all this time, she needed help, and you needed money, and I gave it, and you gave it, and to her. My mother's hands tightened around the cake box. It wasn't like that, she said. No, I asked, voice rising just slightly. Then explain it to me. Make it make sense. There was no answer, just the sound of Mark placing a coffee mug in the sink. Even he didn't speak. His silence was its own kind of fury. She's in trouble, my father said finally. Serious trouble. She's always in trouble, I snapped. She makes trouble, and then you run in to fix it. She's your sister, my mother added. And I'm your daughter, I said louder now. The one who stayed. The one who paid your bills. The one who you let believe you needed help, when really you were just helping her. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. My mother tried to say something, but I cut her off. You let me carry her mess. You watched me juggle 2 jobs. You said thank you with straight faces while sending my money to the person who stole from me. Mark stepped beside me now, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. I think it's time for you to go, he said. Calm, clear, final. They didn't argue. They just stood there for a second longer looking at me like I had broken something sacred. And maybe I had, but I wasn't going to fix it this time. They walked away, cake box still in hand. The door clicked shut behind them. For a long time, none of us spoke. Mark went back to the dishes. I sat down at the table. Maya's voice drifted down the stairs, singing about jelly beans again. This time I let it make me smile. Because for the first time in years, the air in this house belonged to me. Not to ghosts, not to expectations, not to guilt stitched in cursive on fabric. Just me, my family, and the truth finally taking up space. If you've ever stood at the threshold of your own home, guarding it from the people who raised you, tell me in the comments. Your strength matters, and your boundaries are not cruelty, they're survival. I thought that would be the end of it. I truly believed the worst had already happened. That I had stood my ground, said what needed saying, shut the door literally and emotionally. I'd cut the cord right, but the past doesn't let go that easily, especially when the past still has your number. It was 2 weeks later. I was folding laundry in the living room, the sunlight warming the hardwood floors, Maya humming from upstairs. And for once, my thoughts were quiet. Not replaying old conversations, not planning the next boundary, just quiet. The phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it. I should have ignored it. But I didn't. Hello. There was a pause, then hey. Just one word, but my whole body stiffened. I hadn't heard that voice in over 5 years, yet I knew it instantly. That soft, sultry rhythm. That calculated calm. Emily. I said nothing. I heard you cut them off, she said casually. No hello, no apology, just straight into the mess. They told you that I asked. Yeah, I've been talking to them, she said, for a while now. Of course she had. While I was bailing water out of the sinking ship she left behind, she was still steering from a distance, unseen, untouched. You've been talking to them, this whole time. Pretty much, she said, they never told you. I laughed, not out of humor, out of disbelief. No, Emily, they never did. I figured. Where have you been, I asked. You vanished. No calls, no messages. We didn't know if you were alive. She hesitated. I needed space. No, I said, you needed money, and when the money ran out, you ran too. Silence. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, I said, voice low even. You told us it was an investment. You showed us fake buyers, fake invoices, fake everything. You opened accounts in my name. You destroyed my credit. Do you know what that did to me? She breathed in sharply. I kept going. I had to work 2 jobs. I couldn't qualify for a mortgage. I had to delay everything, buying a home, planning for Maya's future, just to dig myself out of your hole. More silence. And then just when I thought she might say something real, she pivoted, like always. They need you, she said. There it was. The shift. The deflection. She wasn't calling to own anything. She was calling to test the button she used to push so easily, my guilt. They're getting older, she added. Things aren't easy for them. So help them, I replied. Another pause. It's complicated. Things have been tight. You've always been the stable one. Was I whispered. You mean I was the one who kept things from falling apart while you disappeared? You have a job, a family, a home. You're good at this. I let her words hang in the air. A twisted compliment. They don't say it, she added, but they appreciate what you've done. No, they don't, I said. Because appreciation requires honesty. And they've been lying. Then why cut them off? Because I'm tired, Emily. I'm tired of being the only one cleaning up messes I didn't make. There was a silence on her end that felt different this time. Heavier, maybe. I thought, maybe she gets it now. Maybe this was the moment she'd finally say, "I'm sorry." But no, "You're angry," she said, "and if you want to throw everything away because of that, that's on you." And just like that click, she hung up. No apology, no closure, just gone. Again. And this time I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just sat there, the laundry forgotten in my lap, and realized Emily hadn't called to reconnect. She'd called to manipulate. And when the old trick didn't work, she did what she always did, vanished. But this time I wasn't chasing her. Not anymore. If you've ever been used for your steadiness, your patience, your loyalty, only to be discarded when you finally say no, share your story below. Some of us weren't born to shine. Some of us were made to endure. But even we have our limits. And the day we reach them, that's the day we finally reclaim our lives. The morning after Emily's call, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was silent except for the soft whir of the fridge and the occasional creak of the wood floor as I padded into the kitchen. I stood there for a moment barefoot, staring at the coffee maker, wondering how it was possible to feel so empty and so heavy at the same time. Mark came down a few minutes later, already in his work shirt, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. I'm not sure, I said honestly. He didn't push. He never did. Instead, he poured me coffee and slid the mug across the counter like it was a peace offering. We stood there in silence until Maya thumped down the stairs with a backpack twice her size and a pair of mismatched socks. I kissed her forehead. "Have a good day, baby." "You too, Mommy," she said. "Are you gonna wear the red sweater today? I like that one." I smiled. Somehow, even in the middle of unraveling, my daughter still knew how to ground me. After the school drop-off, I came home and sat at the kitchen table opening my laptop. For months, years really, I had spreadsheets, banking tabs, online, payment portals bookmarked like daily rituals. Water bill, electricity, their mortgage, their phone plan, gas bill. I used to call it being helpful. I used to call it being the responsible one. But now I knew better. I wasn't helping, I was being used. I opened the spreadsheet titled Family Expenses and stared at the numbers. There was no thank you column, no repayment timeline, no accountability. Just an endless stream of withdrawals from my lifetime money energy, all flowing into a black hole named Emily, managed by two people who still claimed they didn't know how to tell me. And the worst part, I let them. I enabled it. Because I didn't want to believe that the people who raised me, who tucked me in, packed my lunches, kissed my scraped knees, could choose someone else over me. Could knowingly bleed me to keep another daughter afloat. But they did. And now it was time to stop pretending. I opened my accounts one by one and started hitting cancel. Cancel the $275 monthly transfer toward their mortgage. Cancel the $60 phone plan. Cancel the utility autopay. Cancel, cancel, cancel. Each click felt like a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. And when it was done, I sat back in my chair staring at the blinking cursor on a new blank spreadsheet. I titled it Things That Are Mine. There wasn't much on it yet. A modest savings account, Maya's 529 education plan, the family car, a tiny emergency fund. But every line felt clean, honest, not tied to guilt or obligation, or a system where my worth was measured by how much I gave without complaint. For the first time in my life, I had numbers that belonged only to me. That afternoon, I cleared out the reminder alerts on my phone. No more grocery card for Mom. No more transfer for Dad's cable. No more credit card payment, Emily, a label I'd created years ago, back when I still believed she'd pay me back. I deleted them all. And when I finished, I stared at the blank screen and exhaled. It wasn't peace, not exactly, but it was something close to it. A kind of stillness I hadn't felt since childhood. A space that wasn't filled with chasing approval or fixing other people's disasters. A space I was finally claiming as my own. If you've ever taken care of everyone else so long you forgot what it felt like to be taken care of, please write your name in the comments. Just your name. Let it exist somewhere that isn't a bill, a debt, or a responsibility. Let it be yours again. Because we can't rebuild what we never had. But we can start building what we truly deserve. It had been a week since I stopped everything. No more money flowing out. No more texts from my parents. No more attempts to explain myself or apologize for drawing a line. I thought the storm had passed. Then the whispers began. It started with a message from my cousin Angela, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She texted me out of nowhere. "Heard you're not talking to your parents anymore. Hope everything's okay." Maybe talk to someone, that was followed by a prayer hands emoji, which somehow stung more than if she'd just called me selfish. Then came the emails. Distant aunts, second cousins, a friend of my mother's I hadn't seen since my wedding, all reaching out not to ask why, but to remind me that family is everything, that life is too short to hold grudges, that no matter what happens, blood is blood. One even wrote, "A little girl shouldn't be punished just because adults had issues. Let Maya keep her grandparents." That was the moment I realized what was happening. They weren't just confused. They were being fed a version of the story. A version where I was the villain, the cold daughter who returned a birthday gift and cut off her entire family over a dress. They didn't know about the debt, the lies, the fake business, the stolen identity, the sleepless nights, the job I had to take cleaning classrooms on weekends just to catch up on payments I didn't make. They just knew I had said no. And in some families, that alone is enough to make you the problem. I ignored the messages, at first, until one came in with no name attached, just an unknown number and a short sentence. "She's back." I didn't need to ask who. Later that evening, while folding laundry, I got confirmation the old-fashioned way, a phone call from an old neighbor who still thought catching up meant trading family gossip like coupons. Apparently, Emily had returned. Her overseas plans hadn't worked out. The money ran dry. She came back to reset. And of course, she was living with my parents again. Of course, because that's how it had always been. Emily falls. They catch her. She disappears. They grieve. She comes back. They forgive. And me, I stay. I sweep up the glass. I send money. I get thanked in silence and forgotten in photo frames. But this time something had changed. I didn't feel jealousy. I didn't feel rage. I felt done, like watching a play you've memorized so well that not even the best performance can move you anymore. Mark found me later that night standing in front of the kitchen sink, dish towel in hand, not moving. "She's back," he asked. I nodded. "And your parents?" "Selling the house," I said. "Too much upkeep, too many expenses." He raised an eyebrow but said nothing else. He didn't need to. We both knew what that meant. The cycle was repeating. They'd empty themselves for her again. And when it was over, when she vanished again, they'd look to me to pick up the pieces. But not this time. Maya had stopped asking about them. Slowly, naturally, the way children do when they sense a door that's no longer open. And I didn't force it. I didn't fill the silence with justifications or false hope. I let it breathe. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can give your child is the truth they didn't have to live through themselves. If you've ever been cast as the villain for finally choosing yourself right, I chose me in the comments. Say it loud. Say it in print. Because the only people who call boundaries cruel are the ones who benefited from your silence. And my silence. It ended the day that dress arrived. It was a quiet Sunday morning when everything finally felt still. Maya was dancing in the living room, her hair a tangled mess music blasting from her little pink speaker. Mark was fixing a cabinet hinge I'd ignored for over a year. And me, I was sipping coffee barefoot, watching sunlight pool across the hardwood floor, like everything was exactly where it should be. There was no talk of Emily, no missed calls from my parents, no reminders about payments or guilt or responsibilities disguised as love. It was just us. And that should have been the ending, right? But there was one last thing I hadn't done. I hadn't told them it was over, not just financially, but emotionally. The dress had made a statement. The silence had held its ground. But I needed one final truth. A truth, not just for them, but for me. So I wrote it. A letter. I didn't type it. I wrote it by hand, slowly, deliberately, with the kind of clarity that only comes after years of confusion. 3 short sentences, simple, sharp. You lost one daughter. I'm the one who stayed. You just never noticed. I folded the letter and placed it back inside the paper bag, the same one I had used to return the dress. And then, without telling Mark, without overthinking it, I got in the car and drove. The house looked exactly the same, which somehow felt worse. The porch light still flickered. The overgrown rosemary bush still clawed at the sidewalk. Even the crack in the driveway was in the exact same spot, as if time had simply ignored this place. I walked to the door, placed the bag down gently, and stepped back. No knock. No note. Just closure. On the way home, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt clean. Like I had finally told the truth out loud. Like I had finally stopped whispering in my own life. By the time I got back, Maya was coloring at the kitchen table, and Mark had started pancakes. The house smelled like cinnamon and warm vanilla. He looked up when I walked in, handed me a plate. You okay? I nodded, more than okay. But the day wasn't done. At exactly 9:14 a.m., the phone rang again. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another, and another. By noon, I had over 10 missed calls. I checked one voicemail, just one. It was my mother. Her voice was sharp, almost panicked. "You're returning a gift. What kind of message is that?" Then my father's voice in the background. "And what does she mean? She's not paying anymore. What the hell is she talking about?" That's when I knew they'd read the letter. I didn't respond. But my hands were steady, my breath calm. And for the first time I realized that their confusion wasn't real. It was performance. A final attempt to shame me back into place. But I wasn't going back. Not to being the dependable daughter. Not to being the cleanup crew. Not to being the second choice. If you've ever had to end something quietly, not with a bang, but with a soft, steady no, let me know in the comments. You don't have to explain your silence. You don't have to justify your boundaries. Sometimes the quietest decisions are the ones that change everything. And if this story resonates with you, if you've ever been the one who stayed, the one who bent, the one who broke in silence, then stay with me. We're just getting to the part where everything changes. And if you haven't already, take a deep breath and follow this journey. You deserve to know how it ends. I thought that letter would be my last word. I truly did. But like a storm that lingers just beyond the horizon, my parents weren't done. By Monday afternoon, I'd lost count of the missed calls. Some from blocked numbers, some from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. People I barely remembered suddenly remembered me at least enough to weigh in on how harsh I'd been, how ungrateful, how cold. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Because anger meant I still cared what they thought. And after what came next, even that thread was gone. At 12:27 p.m., my phone rang. This time I answered. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wanted to finally hear them say it to my face. Or maybe I just needed confirmation that I wasn't imagining things, that they really were choosing her. Again. "Hello," I said. My mother's voice was tight, furious. "You're being cruel," she snapped. "You're doing this to punish us for something that wasn't even our fault." "Really?" I asked calmly. "She fooled all of us," she insisted. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said it, "And yet you keep asking me to pay for it." "She's your sister." "She was your favorite," I corrected. "Don't be petty." That one almost made me laugh. Almost. Then my mother's tone changed, softer, pleading. "We lost her," she said. "You know that. We lost a daughter." I closed my eyes, inhaled. "You didn't lose her," I replied. "She stole everything you gave her and ran." There was a beat of silence. And then my mother asked the question that gutted me more than anything else had. "So now you're going to take Maya from us too?" I sat with that for a moment, let the weight of it settle. Then I said what had been growing in my chest for years. "You don't want Maya, you want Emily. You're just trying to find her in someone else." "That's not fair." "No," I said. "What's not fair is that I was the one who stayed. I was the one who cleaned up after her. I worked 2 jobs. I sent you money every month. I drained myself for you. And none of it was ever enough, was it?" "That's not true," she said quietly. "Then name one time," I challenged. "Name one time you looked at me and didn't see a disappointment." She didn't answer. And that silence, it spoke louder than every phone call combined. "You're being dramatic," she said finally. "I'm being done," I replied. And I meant it. I hung up. Then I blocked her number again. I went into my calendar and deleted every recurring reminder. Send rent money reload, grocery card check, electric bill for dad. One by one I erased them. And when I was done, I opened a blank spreadsheet. At the top I typed things that are mine. It was still mostly empty, but it was clean. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the first time in my adult life that I felt like I was living my life. Not theirs, not Emily's, mine. And Maya, she never asked why Grandma didn't come to her recital. She just held my hand, smiled wide, and whispered, "I'm glad it was just us." So am I, baby. So am I. If you've ever walked away not because you hated them, but because they made you disappear in your own story, write, "I'm back" in the comments. You don't need their permission to exist. You don't need to carry the cost of their denial. And if you believe stories like this matter, if you've ever felt this story, then please let others find it too. Like, comment, and subscribe. Not for me. For you. For the next person who needs permission to let go. It's strange how quickly people forget what they put you through when you stop letting them do it. A few weeks passed. No more phone calls, no more emails, no more strangers telling me how to fix things I didn't break. My parents went silent, radio silent, and not in a peaceful, understanding way. More like someone slamming a door and pretending they didn't hear you knocking for years. But the quiet didn't bother me. What did bother me, what settled under my skin like a splinter, was how predictable it all was. Because the next person to knock wasn't a friend or a relative. It was Emily. Again. It came in the form of a message first. A simple "can we talk?" I didn't respond. Then another "they're struggling?" Then you're good at this. You've always been the stable one. And that right there, that sentence is what made me freeze. Because for so long that had been my role. Not the loved one, not the celebrated one, but the stable one. The one who knew how to budget, how to work 2 jobs, how to keep everything afloat while everyone else got to drift. Emily didn't say "I'm sorry." She didn't say "I'm here to make things right." She just reminded me of the role I'd been assigned without consent, the savior. I didn't reply. Then one morning, too early for anyone to just drop by, there was a knock on the door. I was making coffee. Maya was upstairs brushing her teeth. Mark opened it before I could stop him. And there they were. My parents. Again. My mother held a cake box in both hands like she was offering peace through sugar. My father stood beside her, that same stiff posture, the look of a man more burdened by obligation than regret. "We just want to talk," she said. I stayed behind the kitchen island. No one moved to invite them in. "You've been talking to Emily," I said. They didn't even try to deny it. "For a long time now," my mother answered. "How long?" "Since the first year she left," my father added, voice low. I stared at them. "So let me get this straight. She needed help. You needed money. I gave you what I could, and you gave it to her." My mother's hands shook slightly on the cake box. "It wasn't like that." "Then explain it," I said. "Make it make sense." But they couldn't. Because it was like that. They had used my money to keep her afloat. My help, my sacrifices rewired and rerouted back into the person who had broken all of us. "She's your sister," my father said again, as if that changed anything. "And I'm your daughter," I snapped. The one who stayed, the one who tried. Silence. Then my mother finally whispered, "She's in trouble." "She's always in trouble," I said. "She made mistakes. She made choices I corrected." Mark stood beside me, arms crossed now. He didn't say a word, but his presence behind me was loud enough. "I think it's time for you to go," he said quietly. My parents didn't argue. They looked at me like I had betrayed them, as if my refusal to be drained any further was the ultimate sin. And I realized something right then as they walked down the steps. They weren't sorry. Not for what they did. Not for who they abandoned. Not for what they cost me. They were just angry the well had finally dried up. If you've ever been the family reservoir, the one everyone comes to drink from until you're empty, leave a comment. Just one word, enough. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can say isn't "I forgive you." Sometimes it's "I remember, and I'm done." It's been over a year since that morning. 1 full year since I last saw my parents standing on my porch cake box in hand guilt on their faces like it was perfume they hoped I wouldn't smell. 1 year since I blocked their numbers, since I returned that dress, since I said no and meant it. In that time, I haven't heard a single word from them. Not one voicemail. Not one "we miss Maya." Not one "how are you holding up?" And I haven't reached out either. Not out of spite. Not even out of pain. But because silence, I've learned, can be sacred when it's chosen. It can be peace. But nothing stays still forever. A few weeks ago, I heard through a second cousin, one of those distant family members, who still sends mass holiday emails like it's 2003 that Emily came back. Apparently her life abroad hadn't gone the way she planned. When the money dried up, so did the attention. So she returned. Quietly. Like a storm cloud rolling back in when you've just put away your umbrella. She's living with my parents again. Of course she is. They're selling the house now. Too many bills, too much upkeep. The mortgage too heavy. Their bodies too tired. It's not the first time she's left them broke, but maybe it's the first time they've realized it won't stop. Maybe. I didn't ask where they were moving. I didn't ask how they're doing. Because here's the thing I don't want to know. There was a time when I would have begged for information. When I would have tracked real estate listings in their zip code. When I would have called the pharmacy to make sure their prescriptions were still being filled. But that woman doesn't live here anymore. These days, Sunday mornings mean pancakes with Maya. We make them messy and imperfect, flipping them too early and laughing at the shape. Mark built a new shelf for her books. Maya blasts music while brushing her teeth, inventing dances that make 0 sense but light up the entire room. There's no pink dress in the closet. No whispers of comparisons. No ghosts of Emily lingering in my daughter's reflection. Just Maya, wild, brilliant, entirely herself. And me, I sleep now. Not just lie down and close my eyes, but real sleep. The kind where you don't dream of obligations, where your chest isn't tight, where you don't wake up preparing yourself to be disappointed. The kind of sleep that tells you you're safe, Sometimes I catch myself feeling guilty for how peaceful it is. But I've learned to stop that thought in its tracks, because I earned this. I survived this. And survival doesn't always look like climbing out of the rubble fists in the air. Sometimes it looks like morning coffee, like a door that stays closed, like a spreadsheet titled Things That Are Mine, and the calm that comes with knowing no one else has access. If you've made peace with letting go even when the world told you to hold on, right, I kept myself in the comments. Because that's what this is about. Not revenge, not punishment. Just self-preservation. The kind that feels a lot like love. Only this time, it's pointed inward. Some people think healing is a dramatic event, like a sunrise over a battlefield. That one day the pain just lifts, and your life is lit up with clarity and forgiveness and freedom. But that's not how it happens. Healing is quieter than that. Slower. It shows up in ordinary moments that don't feel like much until you realize you didn't flinch. For me, it was a Tuesday. Maya came home from school with a story. Her teacher had complimented her presentation on sea turtles, and she couldn't stop smiling. Her hands moved in wide circles as she talked, her voice rising with excitement. She reminded me of someone. And for the first time, it wasn't Emily. It was herself. She didn't remind me of anyone but Maya, and I didn't compare her to any ghost in my head. I didn't hear echoes of old expectations. I just saw my daughter radiant, confident, free. That night after she went to bed, I sat by the window, the lights off, watching shadows move across the floor. Mark joined me, handing me a mug of chamomile tea, like he always did when I got that look on my face. "Where'd you go just now?" he asked. I sipped my tea. Nowhere, for once. And that was the truth. I wasn't haunted, I wasn't angry, I wasn't wishing things were different, I was just still. He smiled, pressed a kiss to my temple, and left me to my quiet. That was healing. But the universe has a funny way of testing it. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten return address, my parents'. No postage, just left in our mailbox. I stared at it for hours before opening it. Inside were two things. A photo of Emily and Maya together. It must have been from a visit I didn't know happened. Maybe during the early years before everything fell apart. Maya was 3 or 4, smiling shyly, while Emily crouched beside her, arms wrapped around her like they were best friends. Like history hadn't happened yet. And the second item, a short note. Just one line. "We thought you'd want to remember how close they used to be." No apology. No accountability. Just a subtle dig disguised as nostalgia. I held the photo for a long time. Not because I missed Emily. Not because I regretted anything. But because I wanted to see if it still had power over me. It didn't. I tore the photo in half. Not out of rage, but out of release. Because whatever closeness once existed between Maya and Emily, it was a shadow. A blip. And it wasn't real. Not the way they wanted it to be. Not enough to rewrite everything that came after. I tossed the pieces into the trash. Not carefully. Not dramatically. Just gone. Then I lit a candle. Not as a ritual, just because I liked the scent. I sat back down, flipped through Maya's drawing notebook. She'd filled a whole page with stick figures holding hands. One tall, one medium, one small. Us. Me, Mark, and her. No extras. No missing pieces. No one cropped out. If you've ever had to redefine your family from the ashes of what they told you, it should be drop a line below. Something as simple as, "We made our own." Because sometimes the greatest love story isn't the one you inherited, it's the one you built from scratch. And if you've been holding on to a photograph that no longer serves you, you're allowed to let it go. You're allowed to start over. And you're allowed to do it without looking back. A few months ago, Maya asked me something I wasn't prepared for. We were walking through a weekend farmer's market, her small hand in mine, a fresh bag of peaches swinging from my other arm. The kind of peaceful, sunny afternoon that makes you forget you ever lived in chaos. She was quiet, which was rare for her. Usually she filled the silence with questions about bugs or clouds or which dog breed would win in a race. But this time she asked Mommy, "Do you think Grandma misses me?" It stopped me in my tracks. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wasn't sure which version of the truth she was ready for. I knelt beside her, brushed a curl out of her face, and said the only thing that felt honest. "I think she misses the version of you she wanted you to be." She looked at me confused. So I added, "But that version wasn't you, and that's not your fault." She nodded slowly. Then in the simple, powerful way that kids do, she asked, "You don't want me to be someone else, right?" I smiled. "Never, I only want you to be you." And that was the moment I realized the real difference between me and my parents. They raised daughters to reflect something back at them, a vision, a fantasy, a legacy. I'm raising one to become something on her own terms. Later that evening, as we folded laundry together on the couch, Maya held up one of her old dresses, the yellow one with tiny strawberries near the hem. It was too small now, the fabric faded from 100 washes. "Can we give this to someone?" she asked. "It's too tight." I nodded, "Of course." She laid it gently into the donation pile, then paused. "But I love this one." "I know," I said. "And loving something doesn't mean you have to keep it forever." I don't think she knew what those words meant to me, but I did. Because for the longest time, I loved a family who couldn't love me back the way I needed. And I kept trying, folding myself smaller, making room for them, hoping one day they'd notice. They didn't, and that's okay now. I don't need them to. They missed the chance to know the woman I became. The mother, the partner. The person who finally said enough and meant it. And in their place, I built something new. Not flashy, not perfect, but real. Maya doesn't ask about them much anymore. And when she does, it's brief, passing. Like a cloud that moves over the sun but doesn't stay long enough to cast a shadow. We made a new Sunday tradition: waffles, silly socks, and Maya's dream journal, where she draws all the things she hopes to do someday. Sometimes she includes me. Sometimes she doesn't. Both are beautiful, because either way she's dreaming for herself. And I will never let anyone, not even me, steal that from her. If you've ever chosen to break a cycle instead of repeat it, leave a comment below. Just 3 words: I chose freedom. Let them echo for the next person still afraid to say it out loud. And if this story has meant something to you, if any piece of it has held up a mirror to your own experience, then I invite you to stay. Subscribe. Share. Not because I need numbers, but because maybe, just maybe, someone else out there needs permission to choose themselves too. Let's be that voice. Together. Looking back on everything, I realize that freedom isn't given, it's taken. It's a choice. A hard, painful, sometimes lonely choice to stand up, to say no, and to build boundaries where there were none. It's choosing yourself when everyone else expects you to bend. Choosing your peace over their approval. I'm not here to say I'm perfect. I'm not here to pretend that cutting ties or standing firm is easy. It breaks your heart in ways you didn't know existed, but it also saves your soul. My story isn't just about a pink dress, a lost sister, or even a fractured family. It's about reclaiming identity, about loving your child enough to protect her from old wounds, and about loving yourself enough to finally put down the weight of others' expectations. If you've ever felt trapped by your past or held down by the roles others assign you, this is your permission slip to let go, to breathe, to rebuild, and to find joy in being you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, inspired you, or helped you feel less alone, please join me on this journey. Subscribe to hear more stories of courage, healing, and choosing freedom. And share your own story in the comments. We're stronger when we stand together. Because the truest freedom isn't just surviving, it's living fully, fiercely, and authentically. And that's a choice worth making every single day.